and you can see film of me spinning because I don't have a working spinning wheel here to bring and show you. I became very happy with the process of spinning on the wheel, and I feel like I achieved my main question with the creative project, which was to understand spinning as an embodied process connected with women's wisdom from ancient times. This has been my main concern with the MA from the start. So we'll just go to the start of my presentation, at least I'll try to do that. And I'm just gonna very quickly go through this this presentation because some of you saw my interim presentation and heard me talk about this a little bit. Where I got to at that point was that I had spun all of this wool in a process I'll tell you about. And then Angela said, but you should really do something with it. So then I learned to knit, having learned to spin. And are there people here who know how to spin in this room? Good. Anyone who knows how to knit? Very good. I didn't know, and it was really difficult to learn. But it's something that women in particular have been doing for thousands and thousands of years. And the thing about dancing, which is my main interest, you probably got this email, I don't have to read that to you, but I just want to show you this slide. There are so many representations of women spinning and doing other textile related arts from the ancient world, from antiquity, that there are lots of statues of Aphrodite holding the distaff and the spindle in the classic pose, up and out. They think, some scholars think, that the Venus of Milo in the Louvre, whose arms are famously missing, she was actually holding up a distaff and a spindle, as they've recreated that here. Why was Aphrodite, the goddess of love, connected to the act of spinning? Because this is to do with the cosmic mystery of making something out of nothing. And Aphrodite was not just a romantic goddess, it was really the root of coming into being came from Eros, which gave form to the formless, and that's what spinning is all about. So I wanted to learn women's spinning in order to better understand women's dancing, because the dancing can't be carbon dated. We know they've been doing it for thousands of years, but it doesn't leave any archaeological traces. Spinning and textile work don't leave much, but they do leave enough for us to know that they had advanced textile fibers, making yarn and plying it 22,000 years ago at least, and possibly way longer. Here you see a vase from the 7th century BC. This is from Hungary. This is in the Natural History Museum of Vienna, and you see women's weaving on a warp-weighted loom in the middle, spinning immediately to the left. There's a musician playing an ancient lyre, Angela, and then two women dancing. So there is this connection between women's work with dance, women's work with textiles. The women that I've studied with in the Balkans that gave me my interest in these ancient women's crafts all know how to spin, knit, weave, and embroider, and it's a really important part of their culture. I brought some things to show you that you could just pass around. This, I got this in Morocco. This could be hundreds of years old. It's of a style of spindle that they were using in Egypt in the Middle Kingdom. And this is a warp weight for an upright loom, which I found when I was walking through the Atlas Mountains not long ago. And that could be 8,000 or 9,000 years old, or not. You know, but they've been using exactly that. Yeah, it was while I was thinking about this project that one came to me. And then I'll also, I'll pass around. This is unspun wool that's been carded and combed. It's called a roving. And this is wool that I spun as part of my project. So the process of going from nothing to something, that process of creation is where it all begins. So I was looking at women's work basically as a way of women transmitting particularly the wisdom that they weren't able to transmit through means of reading and writing, because firstly these arts way predate reading and writing, but secondly, once reading and writing was developed in literate and historical societies, women have often been excluded from literacy. So they've had other ways of transmitting information including fairy tales and myths, which of course they tell while someone is spinning. This is the classic setup for the winter evenings all over Eastern Europe, including the stories of the fates, the three fates, or the miras, or the norns, the one who spins the thread, the one who measures the thread, and the one who cuts the thread. So the idea of spinning is not just a metaphor for creation and for the origin of life, but also for the measure of life and then ultimately for death. And as you'll hear, my personal experience of this project, which was more than I was expecting, took me exactly into that realm. So I'll talk about that, and then also my personal experience of learning to knit and something called the Sisterhood Project. These are some of the books that helped me on my path of learning about not just the ancient textile arts as far as archaeologists are able to know, but also the meaning that's been imbued with metaphors of textiles since the very beginning. Cicero, Plato, Herodotus, everyone was using metaphors to do with textile work because this was so familiar in every household in the ancient world. And particularly because this was women's work up until about 1000 BC, as far as we know. The making of cloth created a background rhythm of female life in ancient Greece that is both visual and audible if one knows where to see and hear it. So I was kind of on the trail of understanding, trying to understand. So taking a look at women's work. Some of the women that I know and have danced with and have had the good fortune to have as my teachers in Greece and the Balkans are these Sarakatsan women wearing costumes that they've spun and knitted and woven and embroidered, all using the techniques that you see up here. The spinning with the distaff on the left, she's winding, I guess, and measuring the yarn, and then she's got the ball of thread. It's interesting that whoever set this photo up, I think, must have been thinking of the three fates, because you have the young one who's spinning in that act of creation. You have the mother one with the responsibility of measuring the span, the allotment of thread, and then the old woman, the wise woman, the crone, has the ball with the end of the thread in her hand. So these women knit these kind of wrist warmers from thread that they've spun from black sheep and white sheep. And this is something that they have been doing in a manner that people think is unchanged also for thousands of years. These are like the original Neolithic inhabitants or nomadic inhabitants of the southeastern Balkans. And this is one of the aprons that those women, a different group of Sarakatsan, wear. You can see that the idea that the textile art is conveying information and wisdom through patterns and symbols, you can get that they've chosen with care patterns that have power and significance to them. We may not know what the significance was, but we can know that they did have significance. And I'm also going to pass around, these are hand-spun and hand-woven cloths. This is from Epirus. It's interesting to note that the dye colors of red and blue up until about 1865, those were the only dyes that they had from natural materials, from indigo and from the cochineal beetle, that didn't fade with time and light. This is why red, white, and blue are the classic colors of all the national flags that were founded before that time. And this is also an extremely fine example of hand-spun and hand-woven cloth. If you look at this as it comes around, please be a little bit delicate, and just imagine how much work it would have taken to spin something so fine. And every woman would have been making dozens, if not hundreds, of pieces of textile for herself and her household for thousands of years. This was a huge economic contribution to the ancient world. And that's real gold, also embroidery that they have there. So, I had a belt, but I don't know what I did with it. Anyway, what she's got here is this distaff, which would normally go into the belt. Sorry, let's see if I can make do here. And this is to hold your source of wool up and out of the way of your hands. Otherwise, you have the wool that you're trying to spin getting tangled up with the wool you are actually spinning, and then also the hair gets tangled. So what you want, and I didn't learn mastery of the drop spindle, but I can probably more or less show you how it's supposed to work if you imagine somebody doing a better job of this. You get the spindle spinning, and you send the twist up your thread and then you spin it some more, and you send the twist up some more, and you spin it some more, and you send the twist up some more before the spindle unspins. This is the problem. If you have a better spindle with a heavier weight, you can get a little farther before it starts to spin the other way. Or you can do this technique that they call park and draft. I'm really not an expert at this, but just to give you an idea, you can hold the spindle with the twist and then take your time sending the twist up the thread, whereas normally my spindle has gone the other way by now and has unspun all the spinning I was trying to do. For people who are trying to learn, this is a much better way. You can really take your time to send the fiber up. And this is kind of the process of spinning on a spinning wheel. Then once you have some thread on your spindle, you wind it up on the spindle. It's a pretty time-consuming process. This is making a very chunky yarn that ultimately somebody will probably be able to knit. But if you look at that very fine piece of linen that's going around with the gold embroidery, you can see just how skilled most people were in the crafts that they did in the ancient world. So I spent hours and hours on the wheel, not so much with the spindle, the drop spindle and the distaff, but I wanted to get a feel for it. And it's extraordinary to me how little I had understood that this is what women in the ancient world, up until actually the last century in the Balkans, this is what they did with their lives and their time. They had their spinning with them all the time, and they would be riding side saddle on a donkey while spinning. You see this still sometimes in Greece, walking over the mountain paths while spinning, producing this enormous quantity of thread. There's a tale, I think, in Herodotus, where it's the Persian king. I'm sorry, I don't remember this exactly, but there's a certain group of people wanting to convince the Persian king to make an alliance with them instead of making war. And what they do is they send the king's sister, not the Persian king, the Greek king's sister, to go fetch water. And she's got a water jug balanced on her head, and she's leading a horse tied to her arm, and she's spinning while she's walking. And this made a really big impression on the Persian king, and he said, can all the women here do what you do? And she said, oh yeah, we're all like that. And so then the Persian king made the alliance. So why is this particularly women's work? Just very briefly, I mean, you can look at all that if you want to. You have to be able to pick it up and put it down to stop the toddler from stumbling into the campfire or whatever else you need to do. So all of these activities that have been traditionally women's work is because they have to be compatible with childcare. That's the main reason, but that is still so. And then what I think is also really interesting is that ability to pick up where you left off. That comes from the Latin word contexo, to weave together. The truth is anybody could pick up the weaving or the spinning or the embroidery. Although I've been with my Balkan teachers in a village in northern Greece where they want to, oh, I'll finish this for you, you have so much to do. No, you can't spin well enough, leave my spinning alone. And they're laughing, but they're serious because they're really judged on the quality of their work. So they do help each other. But this weaving together, contexo, gives us our sense of context, to pick up where you left off. And what I found with all of this work, also with weaving and embroidery, it's the same as with spinning and knitting. You can put it down and you can pick it up again. And actually my whole creative project was a little bit like that, because I had a lot of unexpected disasters or things that happened in my life that kind of put this whole creative project on hold for over a year. But I found that like the spinning and like the knitting, I could pick it up again. And that was also very interesting. I think that's part of the women's wisdom as well. It's also really interesting to mention the connection with epic poetry, because the main pattern of twill weaving that they used in the ancient world was over one thread of the warp and under two threads, over one, under two, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 1. 1, 2, and that's the rhythm of the dactylic epic poetry of the Homerian epics and all of the other ancient poems that have come down. It's also the main Sirkos dance rhythm that we have in Greece as the main dance today. So the idea that people were maybe singing songs to help them keep the pattern as they wove, that gave a rhythm, that gave also the phrasing of the words to the songs or poems or stories they were telling, that also gave a rhythm to the song or the dance. That's all very much more interconnected than I had understood at the beginning. This quote did not get formatted completely correctly, but the main thing I wanted to say is that for women, textiles are their texts, and our word text comes from the Latin textus, which means textile. So this is a very ancient connection that I think is very interesting to learn more about. We don't know so much about it, but there's lots of fairy tales hinting at the importance of spinning. These are some of them that you may know. And then there's almost the only image that young people today have of spinning and weaving is through the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty, where she's supposed to have this prophecy that she pricks her finger on a spindle. Well, if you look at the movie, that's not even the spindle, that's the distaff. That's the distaff that holds the wool that's going to be spun. The spinning wheel doesn't have a spindle, it's used one or the other. So, and also, I don't know why the distaff would be sharp. It's supposed to be round and smooth and not catch on your fiber. These are mysteries that I don't know, but it's interesting. You'll see in a moment that my journey took me to Austria, which is where I had to go to learn to spin. And then I had a training with my advanced students there who were all a little older than me. They all remember their mother, their aunts, their grandmothers. Everyone had spinning wheels. Everyone was spinning and weaving and knitting and doing all of these things. So they had this first-hand experience that no one in America that I knew ever saw anyone spin. Knitting, yeah, but spinning, no. So we also have myths of spinning all over the world, actually, not only in the ancient Greek stories of Ariadne and the Labyrinth or Arachne, but also in Ghana, the story of Anansi, the spider trickster, the Navajo spider woman, and then of course Mary, in many icons of the Annunciation. I probably shouldn't have her under myth there, but I did have this lovely picture showing her interrupted with the spinning in her hand, and this again, it's not just the fact that women of the Middle East were spinning all day, every day. Whenever they weren't doing something else, they would have been spinning or weaving. But it's this act of creation again, making something out of nothing with no other human intervention. This is this act of creation and Genesis, which the Annunciation was all about, and the Immaculate Conception. With the three fates, again, as I said, you have klotho. Klotho, the word means I spin, I create. Lachesis is the one who measures the thread, the allotment of your lifespan. Lachesis, it's like your lot, literally. It gives the same word, the modern Greek word for lottery is lachio, and that has the same root as the goddess Lachesis. And then atropos means she who cannot be turned, she whose mind cannot be changed. So the moment of your death, they believed, was preordained by these three fates. So the spinning had a power also in the mythic imagination. You see this in the tarot card, showing the Wheel of Fortune as a spinning wheel. And so all of this was in my mind when I went to Austria, to this beautiful place in southwestern Austria to learn to spin. And I had a spinning day with just a few other people and this beautiful teacher. She brought spinning wheels for everyone to try. And so this is me plying two different balls of yarn that I had spun in that day. This is the learning process. And then this took me into, well, you've had a day today on the four senses, haven't you? So we've kind of looked at the literal and then the kind of symbolic levels of spinning. But for me, the moment of tropological transformation was during that spinning day. And I can't even talk about it without getting tearful. I got the message that my closest friend had died. And it was really terrible. I felt I was too far away to get to the funeral or to be with the family. She was in Paris. I was way in the middle of nowhere. And I felt there was nothing I could do with my grief. There was no one there who knew her. There was no one there. But I could spin. Somehow with the spinning, this sense of connection to life somehow helped me feel connected to death and then through that to life again. It's very difficult to put into words, but I feel that I had this experience of the mystery of creation, of life, death, transformation, and new forms. Somehow who's got the wool? It's up there by you, Simon. Would you hold the raw wool up?
The raw wool.
And then the spun wool. You know, somehow the raw wool ceases to be what it is by taking on this form of the ball. And then that ball of thread ceased to be, it died. It ceased to be what it is by taking on the form of the scarf, this is me finally getting to my creative project. These are some pictures of France. She was my mother's age, but we weren't anything like mother and daughter in our relationship. We had many wild adventures together, and she was a dance partner, and she was also a textile artist. And I feel really lucky to have had one person in my life, but it was terrible when she left. As much as I know that she was ready, and it doesn't mean anything really when you're in the depths of grief. And I stayed on a few days at this center, or maybe only one day, I can't remember, but the teacher of the spinning day lent me her spinning wheel because she saw that the spinning process was helping me with this difficult situation of bereavement. And I just spun through my tears with this window, that's out the window of my room, looking at this labyrinth that they have there. And I walked the labyrinth and thought about the labyrinth and Ariadne and everything that's monstrous about death, because it's really terrible to lose the ones you love, even if you think you're prepared. This somehow got me through. And then I decided I would go to the funeral, and my poor students had to fend for themselves for a day. But before I left, I did a little ritual in the woods near that place where I wound the yarn around a tree and made a little offering of bread. And France had these two long white plaits. I made the ends of the yarn into those plaits. So I used it to connect to her. She was a spinner and a weaver, and I felt that in that moment with that tree I was able to say goodbye. And then I still had the spinning wheel when I was with my students, and so that's when someone made this little film of me spinning. So that was really the first part of the creative project, was getting to the place not of mastery, but of being at home in the spinning and being drawn into that sense of, it was like an initiation, because it gave me a body-based understanding of something I had not previously understood. And so you all saw that earlier. We're down here. Oops. So this is some of the thread that I spun, and Angela said, oh, why don't you find something to do with it to complete your creative project? Oh, this is maybe slightly out of sequence, but these were some of the books that helped me understand the neurological processes of spinning, that you're looking at what you do in a way that brings the right and left hemispheres of the brain into balance. There's a whole neurological science to this, entering this kind of trance state through spinning, by the way, but I won't go into that now. I will also say that for the Sufis, the name Suf, meaning the friend, the seeker in Sufism, means a strand of wool. So this whole process of transformation is connected with being a seeker on the path of spiritual wisdom in the Sufi understanding. And that was, that meant as much to me as anything else that I discovered along that path. So as I said, things intervened in my life. I got married, I moved house, my father went into the realm of dementia and needed a lot of care. There were just lots and lots of things that happened that took my time away from the creative project. So it wasn't until more than a year later that I went back to Austria with this creative project coming up, and I went with my bag of wool and I said, friends, this is some of the same women who were with me that weekend, some of them had known France also. And I said, can you teach me to knit? And they said, we'd love to teach you to knit. Of course, all of them knew how to knit. But the truth was, I was very slow to learn. I couldn't learn in the time that I had. And that was a kind of a little microcosm of the whole creative project of my whole time on the MA, if I'm perfectly honest, because here I am starting my 4th year. And it's going very slowly, partly because 5 years ago, when I was initially enrolled, I had an accident that left me physically disabled and also a head injury that affected my cognitive processing, which meant I had to defer my participation for 1 year already. And then when I started, I came to Canterbury. You might remember I could really not walk very well. I couldn't do much. I wasn't really yet capable of independent living, and it was a real struggle to learn new things. I'm in much better shape, I'm happy to say, but it's really difficult to learn. The neurological processing is not, it's slow. It's really slow. I couldn't learn to knit in the way that I would have liked to. Oh, there's a pattern. Oh, you're showing me. Here it is on YouTube. I'll do what you do. I'll do what you're telling me. I couldn't make it work. So I said to them, what am I going to do? My creative project's coming up. And they said to me, we'll help you. We'll help you knit your scarf. And when you're ready, you can knit on it some too. But we'll get you started. And they all took turns knitting. This is some of them knitting. They took it to restaurants. They took it to the theater. They took it everywhere. Everyone knew how to do these wonderful things. And so they said to me, when you spin, because they'd all seen me spinning, most of them, when you spin, you're bringing together fibers, the weak fibers and the strong fibers. And when you spun your thread, bits of it are weaker and bits of it are stronger, but then you ply it and you make the whole thing really strong. They said, so maybe you're kind of weak on the knitting right now, but we'll be strong fibers for you, and we'll be next to you, and overall we'll make this, so they called it the Sisterhood Project. And so they each knitted different patterns. You can see they were really skilled. Yeah. And it was their gift of love and trust in a way that I found really inspiring. And they put zigzags and triangles and all these symbols they know are meaningful from the dancing. And they put these knitting needles that you're supposed to not be able to let your knitting fall off on them, but I've managed to do that anyway. And so then I did learn to knit. So there are some rows of mine on there, and that felt like a really huge triumph. And maybe that's the last thing that I even need to say about it, because I know that for women of previous generations, this was so normal and natural and mundane as to be beneath notice and also kind of beneath respect. But for me, it was so hard to learn, and I had so few images around me. I felt like it became a metaphor for something really important and basic that we have all lost culturally, that's to do with women's wisdom, to do with wisdom in the body, to do with wisdom that balances the right and the left brains. That's exactly what this MA course is all about. And I feel like, although it was kind of a labyrinth, you start off headed towards the center, and then 20 minutes later, you're still going around outside on the fringes. That whole labyrinth journey to me felt like it was really the essence of what this MA is all about. And I don't even feel bad anymore that it took me so long to do it, because it had to happen in its own time. And the most amazing thing is that while we were together working on this, France's son sent me a picture. This is someone who never sends emails, but he just happened to come across this picture of the two of us on horseback in the Andes in Argentina. That was her first time on a horse. And we had to swim this flooded river on horseback in order to catch our airplane. That's the kind of thing that was happening to the two of us all the time. Wow. Then we were, on that same trip, we were on a plane that was actually going down in the Andes that had engine trouble. And I'm sure that she's the one who saved us anyway. Yes, so, well, I could go on and on forever about France, but just to share with you that for me, the creative project went through all of the four senses of interpretation, starting out with this technical, practical, literal level, into the level of myth and symbol, and then this personal turn, the pathological level, and then really this level of initiation and awakening to something I didn't suspect would be there. So thank you very much.
Thank you.